Hi, I'm Dawn Soler, and you're watching my episode of LipRoll with Valerie Morehouse.
Just jump in. Okay. So, Spencer, you want to take it?
This is so this was kind of a special episode of LipRoll because we're going to blend, like you said, a little bit of the business side of the industry with a little bit of the artistry. I'm Spencer. I produce LipRoll, and this is Valerie.
And I'm Valerie Morehouse. I host LipRoll, and we're welcoming the amazing and talented Dawn Soler today.
Hello.
Yeah, welcome.
We're so excited to have you on.
Thank you.
So we're just going to dive in and ask you some questions about what you do and one of the reasons why we all wanted to bring you on to the show. How long have we known each other now? It's been eight years, since the beginning of Nashville. Mm-hmm. And we met through Nashville.
We met through Callie Corey.
Oh, that's
actually.
right.
Yeah, because I think she had some vocal issues and you helped her, and we needed you.
Yeah.
Then you came and lived with us.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly.
Pretty
and
much.
We had, so that was a funny story too. We had, I don't know if Spencer knows this.
I've never heard this. Yeah.
So we had, when Nashville started, I was training Callie Corey, who wrote Nashville, right? Mm-hmm. And then her husband, T-Bone Burnett, was producing. So I had done some work with Callie, but I'd never met T-Bone yet. And then RJ Cutler is a friend of my husband's and mine who was directing the pilot. And they were looking for a vocal coach. And one day, I guess the story was, Callie came in and said, I have somebody. And then RJ said, well, I have somebody. And they both said the name at the same time. And they said, Valerie Morehouse. And
I was sitting there.
Oh, were you?
That happened.
Wow.
So I love it when that happens. Two people from separate places, but.
That's amazing. Yeah. And so just so everyone knows, all the projects that you've worked on, and we have a list, but it's not the entire list, but it's a long list of really cool stuff. So
I don't list Death Spa.
Okay, so Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Scandal, Nashville, Revenge, How to Get Away with Murder, Ugly Betty, The Big Lebowski, Enchanted, Princess Diaries, Notting Hill, Dumb and Dumber, Being John Malkovich. The list goes on
and on. And when we read this earlier, did a little segment earlier, we were talking about you, and I didn't know you did The Big Lebowski, which was so great. You did, because I trained Jeff Bridges.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. My parents' favorite movie.
Everybody knows the dude, right? Even your generation knows the dude.
Definitely.
They have
Aren't
T-shirts.
they making a new Lebowski?
I think the news is that it was just for the ad, right?
Oh.
Yeah.
For the Stella Artois?
Darn.
Was it just for the beer?
Yeah, unfortunately. But what was your experience on that project? And because that's, for us film nerds here, that's like a big deal.
Well, it was super fun because we had a ton of on cameras. Remember the whole fantasy sequence.
Mm-hmm.
So putting those together was just a ball.
Yeah.
And the Coen brothers, they are just
amazing.
They're amazing. I first started with them. I was working at Polygram Entertainment, and they had just finished Fargo.
Okay.
And I'm trying to remember what the other show was, but we wanted you to do soundtrack for the new show, but we didn't have enough material. So I was like, well, why don't we take Fargo and we'll combine them? And it became this big sensation, and they were really happy about it. Carter Burwell does all of their scores, and they're always so deep and interesting and weird, like the shows. So, but The Big Lebowski was just a blast.
Amazing.
Yeah, and so for the listeners that don't know, some may know who you are, some may not. Dawn is the Senior VP of Music at ABC Television. You've been doing this a really long time. So I'm kind of interested in the career and sort of your early influences, because I don't know some of this. I host so many shows with different artists and different people, and I don't really know their stories because we're dealing with a voice lesson or we're working. And so this is a time to sit down and kind of learn a little bit more about people. And then my amazing research team, they have these awesome questions, and I don't know this about my client. I didn't know they did that. I didn't know she did this. What was your early influences, and how did you sort of get into this job, into this career?
Well, I would wait for my family to leave so I could turn on Van Cliburn, and I loved to conduct while they were gone to an album, an LP. Mm-hmm. So I think that was probably my first real thing that I loved. My mother was an actress. I grew up in a home that was very dramatic and very musical, but I never played an instrument. I wanted to be a pathologist. And
another thing I didn't
and I
know.
got
How
accepted to UCLA, and my parents got a divorce, and so that kind of derailed my plan. And of course, because my mother was an actress, I decided I should try acting, and I got a job as a waitress.
As one does.
As one does. And I think my earliest the first time I heard music to a scene was I was working at Marie Callender's, and it was a Sunday, and it was really busy. It was brunch, and I was really strong, and I could carry all these chilies on so I could carry like 5 chilies at once, and it was
That's
going
impressive.
Through, oh yeah,
I did Coco's, so I know. Yeah, in college.
The more you carry, the easier.
Exactly.
So I was going through the restaurant, and I didn't see the pie on the floor. Oh no. And all the chili went up, and the restaurant was silent, and I was covered in chili, and all I could hear was, "She works hard for the money." And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm scoring my life.
That's amazing.
And that's kind of the first time I was like, huh. But it wasn't until much later, just by happenstance, I got a job at a small production company, and the woman that hired me, after about a month, she said, "You're so organized, and you're so good at all of this minutia, you should work for my brother." And it was Peter Afterman, who was one of the super early music supervisors. And I went to work, and my first day I was arranging my desk, and in walked Peter Gabriel.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And
those
that
are the
was
stories,
it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love Peter Gabriel. Yeah, he was amazing. You know who Peter Gabriel? Yeah. I always have to ask anybody like under
Luckily,
30.
someone grabbed me, and is this producer Bill Leffler, and he was like, "You need to listen to Peter Gabriel." And I was at a writing retreat with a lot of older producers, and they're like, "This was our record."
Avalon. It was just amazing. Yeah.
But what were the early stages of music supervision back then? Because I know, the licensing world has changed, with computers and all of this. But like, what was that world like, dealing with publishers and license and labels and artists and all of that kind of earlier on?
There were no departments.
Okay.
I remember my first movie was The Big Lebowski, and it all took place in New Orleans.
Not a bad place to start, right?
Not a bad. It was musically.
Had you
rich.
known then.
Yeah, it was so rich.
Yeah.
And we had a Professor Longhair song. So it was my job to try to license Professor Longhair. I had no idea, and it wasn't like the now where you just go on the computer and it's like, oh, Professor Longhair, Warner Chappell, blah blah blah. I had to call. I started calling bars and record stores in New Orleans, asking them if they had a connection. Finally, someone gave me his phone number, and I called and I made a deal with Professor Longhair.
Wow.
And you kind of just set a price, and you set the ground rules. There really weren't like things like AMXT, all media excluding theatrical, none of that. There weren't departments. And this was before computers. We used to have this thing called the phonologue, and it was
remember the phonologue.
Remember the phonologue?
Of course.
Oh my gosh. And you'd go through and you'd find and the writer and so forth, and every week you'd get the pages you'd have to put in, and that was it. So there really
very
wasn't.
Archaic.
It was so archaic, and you would do things. I also did the first season of Beverly Hills 90210, and they had us licensed for I think like a year, and then the show like flew off.
Took off.
And so then we licensed for 5 years. So we had to go back like 4 times and relicense.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask. Is like, when it was so vague and open, was that kind of a nightmare for some situations where it's like you don't know this thing's going to be a hit, and now you have to go back and ask for more territories or whatever it is? And how do you learn that negotiating process?
Well, back then it was so loose, you kind of it was just a conversation, and you explained it, and then you come up with a number on the phone, and then you'd send a confirmation. It was very, very loose. These days it's much more structured. And you just kind of know these days your range. It pretty much stays within that. It's artist driven as far as the prices go, but
Yeah, we were just talking about that in an early segment, because you guys were asking me how I started my career, and it was very similar. You know, I said the difference is that I had an advantage in a way because things were loose, and the markets weren't oversaturated with Instagram. I didn't do all of that. I had flyers and business cards, and I drove them in my car. I mean, this is, you know, the little paper that you'd get in college, and you'd want a roommate, and you'd tear off. You know, nothing was digital, right? We didn't have phones, and so it made it easier, but
we
more
used
difficult.
Thomas Guide too.
We did, which I could never read a Thomas Guide. Could you? I'm like flipping it around. And I mean, thank God for technology for me for directions. My husband's always like, you're so bright. How can you not read a map? I said, I don't know. It doesn't work for me.
I get lost still with Waze, so I totally get you, girl.
Waze is pretty insane though. It's like sometimes it feels like a madman's person to get to a place. Like there's a stand-up bit about like when people use like Google Maps or something, they show up maybe 5 minutes later, but they're relaxed and calm. Whereas someone who uses Waze like maybe arrives on time, but like their whole day is like, because they've seen so many parts of LA that they never meant to see. You know?
I'm a native, so I'm fascinated. I go through neighborhoods.
Wow. Where are they taking me? You know, we're neighborhoods now. I mean, we're really off topic, but where there was a whole segment on the news where these neighborhoods that used to be pretty private are really upset because they've got these smaller streets, and everybody's after work now finding this way to get home from work, and it's just traffic all the time in front of their house, and so they're like wanting to put their house on the market. I know, wouldn't it be a drag? So choose wisely, people. Real estate, choose wisely.
For sure.
But it's so interesting because so you grew up watching musicals and entertainment, so there was still sort of that part of you as you know, as a background and maybe wanting to be an actress, where similar to me, you took those talents and you sort of parlayed them into an opportunity, you know. And so I feel like, how many years have you been in music supervision?
Well, my first film was 1984, so that's a long time.
Yeah, but you've seen a lot.
Let's not do the math.
No, let's not do the math. I'm always doing that right to you guys. I'm like, oh my God, what's the math on that? That's crazy. But it's just so fun to sit down and chat with people who have that experience. They were asking me similar questions about just work, and I said a lot of it's just hard work. It's like, you know, choosing your path and sticking to your path. And I feel like you've really done that throughout your career. And so becoming a music supervisor, and this is super curious to me, did you always know that you were going to stay on that path, or did you ever sort of say, oh, okay, I'm going to veer off of this and go do something else?
No, once I understood what it was, I mean, 3 months into my first job with Peter, it really clicked for me, because it is it is definitely creative. There is absolutely that, and that's super exciting, and those are the things that I love now. But what really attracted me was sort of the business side of it. I loved tangled webs, and being able to untangle those webs, whether it was how to set up on camera or how to get this budget to where it needs to be.
Can you explain on camera, that phrase? Like, what does that mean for music supervision?
It means anything musically that happens on camera. Okay. In front of the camera, figuring
out. So like
out.
if a character is singing on the screen, and even though it's pre-recorded, it's now considered like an on-camera.
It should always be pre-recorded, right?
100%. Yes. I was just I'm working on a film. I told you I can't talk about it yet, but with a big actress, and she had this vision that she would just sing some of the stuff live, and I said, no, you can't do that. We've got to pre-record everything.
Yeah.
You know, unless they have a little line, they're doing an a cappella piece or something, and they're just singing a line. I said, everything's got to be.
What are some of those obstacles from the business perspective when they want to do that? Like,
well, there's several things. I mean, just the international delivery. When you go and you're delivering international, you have to have all that. I mean, that's just the technical, boring side of it. But also for me, I feel like actors have enough to do in front of camera, and then you're going to ask them to sing, and you're going to ask them to sing well and in time for every take. And the other, speaking of takes, you never have a consistent take. So you want that so that when you go into the editing room, your takes will line up.
Yeah.
It also just sounds better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't care how well you mic it; it just does not sound the same. And you know, in post, we have so many options in front of us to make it sound live.
Yeah.
So I always tell filmmakers, if they're insistent, I want to do it live. I'm like, okay, great. We're going to pre-record. You shoot my safety takes, and then have fun with live
That's
as
a great
much
compromise.
as you want.
Yeah.
And they do.
Yeah.
And they always end up with pre-record.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or sometimes we'll take a little blend of the live just to, you know.
Make everybody happy.
Right.
Yeah, well, like I think two movies that come to mind are like Bohemian Rhapsody and A Star Is Born. You know, I wasn't on the making, but I know they say a lot of it was live, but it was shot at Coachella. And so, like, would you maybe guess that maybe there's still an element of pre-recorded? I know for Bohemian Rhapsody, a lot of it is actually Freddie Mercury, like a lot of it. And and then there was an impersonator that they got to help fill in, and then Remy
There's
Malek.
all kinds of tricks.
Yeah.
You know?
What are
I
some of
mean,
those tricks?
Well, you pre-record, and I'm sure that they pre-recorded tracks, A, so that they could practice them, B, so that they had it in case, what if you show up and you have,
Totally.
you know, you can't sing that day or for whatever, or fear. But, you know, some of the tricks are earwig. You stick an earwig in an actor's ear, and they're hearing themselves and singing, and it looks live, and you do get a live feed. So that's a trick.
Yeah.
You know, so I bet you they did that.
Well, I do have a little bit of an insight on Bohemian Rhapsody, only because I'm one of the films I'm working on. The music supervisor for this particular film had worked on Bohemian Rhapsody, and I was asking him all these questions off topic. I said, how did they do this? Because I didn't get to work on it, right? It was all sort of Freddie Mercury. He said, but they were able to make those situations live. He said, really the only thing that was difficult was when he was out by the bus and he sang an audition for them because it was cold out, and it was, you know, the breath was coming out of his mouth. And they did get a guy in Nashville that sounded exactly like Freddie Mercury, and they were able to sync that up, because I always find that I'm in the studio, but I don't get to be on your side of it and see all the real inner workings and the tricks, you know? So it was fun for me.
Or it's like for A Star Is Born, I forget what band what band it was, but those were Coachella performance or someone else's performance that they just bring on Bradley Cooper with the crowd of someone else. And like, that sounds like that would be a licensing issue or like difficult. Like, have you dealt with issues like that in movies where it's like you're at some other event and you have to make a performance happen?
ACL in Austin.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, first of all, you just have to get them to approve that you step onto their event, and then they have all kinds of rules. It's always so difficult, and that's why, you know, the magic of TV, you recreate these things. And then, you know, there's just timing, because in film, you know, you have so much time to get the things and budget and all those, and they're on a different schedule. Schedule is always your enemy with anything.
Just squeezing everybody in.
So you went from primarily the first kind of half of your career was music supervision, and now you've kind of transitioned. At what point did you transition to like TV with ABC and the new position that you have? Like, when did that occur?
That was 14 years ago. It was a very deliberate change. I love music supervision, but I also wanted a new challenge. Television was always a place where artists didn't want to put their music. I mean, if you look at, you never saw big bands. In fact, when we were doing Beverly Hills the first time, we had to beg to get artists, and you just really couldn't get.
Who were some of those artists that were like kind of first dipping their toes in?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. I mean, it was probably like on Alien.
Oh, okay.
You know, that was probably the first time you really saw a very deliberate sort of shift in artists wanting to be on television, because it was such a cool show. And I looked at it and I wanted a challenge. The other thing is I wanted the opportunity, because, you know, you can work on a film for a year or two, and you have an idea for a marketing plan, and then something changes. Either the artist's schedule changes or the release date changes. With television, it's every week. And I was really excited about that challenge of connecting artists to show. And television at the time, you also saw that it was becoming film, the quality and the stories they were telling. And so I made a really deliberate decision. And it was funny, when I made the decision, I hadn't even put it out there, and a producer that I'd worked with called me out of the blue. It was like I put it out in the universe, and it came back to me and said, hey, I want you to come and run and start a department at ABC.
Oh, wow.
And I said, well, Barry, I said, I've only been doing film for all these years. And he said, I want you to bring film quality music to television.
Oh, wow.
And that was it.
And what was that first project that you came in with to try that challenge? Like, do you remember what that would have been?
Oh, gosh. It would have been October Road.
Okay.
October Road used a lot of really great music in montages. And I think it was Ryan, what was it? It was a perfect art.
I know it's there's so many.
So
I know
many artists,
they just asked me a similar question about clients. I'm like, I froze. I'm like, there's so many. I can't. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
I
I
can't.
remember reading something that too. I think maybe this was before you came to ABC, but that kind of on the other side of it, because it sounds like there's bands approving the placement of their stuff, and then there's also, you had talked about Lost, the cinematic kind of new world of music kind of coming all at that same time. And like what are some of the shows that I know, like How to Get Away with Murder, and like, are these some of the projects that you're taking these new approaches on, and like what are some of those kind of highlights for you with the shows at ABC, at least, that are maybe more recent?
Nashville was just such a gem.
Yeah.
It was a genre that I love, in a town that I love.
Yeah.
And we got, for the most part, actors that could sing beautifully and great songs. And it was that wonderful opportunity for me to make a deal with a label that was totally invested. And every week we put out songs, and people loved them, and they bought them, and we had all these wonderful, wonderful marketing opportunities. And it gave me the opportunity to begin to explore sort of my next journey. Hopefully it will be, but at least, and that is producing.
Yeah. Because On the Record came out of that.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about On the Record, and just like, I want to stay on Nashville for a bit, because I think it is the perfect example of like what you do, so what exactly is On the Record?
On the Record was an idea that came to me while I was sitting with T-Bone in his studio. And we were talking, and I said, songwriters never get honored. It's always the artist, but this show was about songwriters.
100%.
I said, T-Bone, would you ever consider going in front of camera and maybe doing some sort of interview with a songwriter? Like, we could do it every show. I just kind of threw it out there, and he said yes. I mean, ultimately he didn't want to do it, but it was, again, putting it out in the universe. I so believe in that. You put that energy out. I mentioned it to my mentee at the time, because I've always been a mentor, and she was a producer for digital. 2 days later, she came back with Brian Losciavo.
Brian's great.
I know.
Yeah,
who had
he's
exactly the same idea, and he had the title On the Record. And we produced, I think, 65 episodes for every episode. And at one point, the network came to us and they said, we need an extra episode in the broadcast run. Do you guys think you could expand On the Record to an hour broadcast? And we looked at each other and we were like, hell yes.
That's amazing. That's really cool. So I had a friend, and I don't know exactly when or what season, but I think I was watching some of that unfold from the songwriter side, Trent Dabbs and Amy Stroop and all of them. I remember when that stuff was happening, and they're like, oh, we have a song on today. And I think Trent even may have performed with an artist on camera.
He did on camera. Yeah. Trent Dabbs' music was all over Nashville. Yeah. We used, and it was funny because we used a song in the second episode, and it became so popular in London that he toured London.
Wow.
And he said, it was the first time I'm standing on stage and they're singing back my song to me.
Which song was that?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask me that.
Oh, God, I know, because I'm like, I'm going scanning through my mental Rolodex.
And it was a Hayden song. And it was that really beautiful montage. That
Don't
she
put
did.
dirt on my grave just yet.
No,
that was later.
That was later. But
Will
anyway,
come to us
yes,
at some point
it'll come
when
to
we're,
us.
we're not doing the podcast,
Yeah.
right?
Of course, when we're driving or
right
having a
tonight.
night
Oh
of
yes,
something.
I've got it. No, it was a really special project.
And that's you two kind of worked heavily together on that.
I just
or-
came in for a couple of the episodes when I was there in Nashville, and just got to watch Dawn sort of do her thing and watch Chip come on and sing with some of the writers, and it was just it had not been really done before.
Was Chip previously a singer, or was that so he already kind of had that? And is that how at least the casting was done? So you were already working for the most part with.
He had played Buddy Holly on Broadway,
Oh, okay.
so he was very much that. But it's interesting because Sam, who played Gunner, and Claire, who played Scarlett, they were cast and they came the day before we had to pre-record them.
Right.
One came from London, one came from New Zealand.
Yep.
And Buddy Miller and Kylie and I were in the studio, and they came in and they had met the day before, and they were both nervous. I don't think they had ever been on mic, actually.
No.
Or ever worn headphones. And they stood kind of in this situation with the microphone in between them. And I remember Callie and I were like, should we leave the room? Because it was like nothing I've ever, I've got chills right now thinking about that moment. It was magical. So much so that we shot it the same way we experienced it. And that we knew that something magical was happening.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So it's like the musical moments in real life were kind of informing a lot of the storytelling.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it was put together, I think, as TV is, very quickly. Everything sort of has to be last minute, and I ended up Skyping with Sam in London, and Skyping with Claire. And then we came in for the pilot, and it was just this magical thing of watching all of their efforts. Just even in that month, I think we had maybe a month to get ready for the pilot, and watching them have that opportunity in the studio, and it just was magical.
Yeah.
It was a really special show.
So now, post Nashville, your job, like your day to day, as far as overseeing, like you oversee a lot of music supervisors, composers, you have a large team, and I'd imagine a lot of shows that are running. Like, how do you approach a task that large week to week?
No day is the same. I go in with a list of things I want to do that day, and it gets completely blown. It can, you're in production. Television has changed in the last 10 years. It's not on a schedule anymore. We just finished pilot season, which is traditional. But on top of it, we are posting shows, we are prepping shows. So every day it's just kind of, which fire drill am I going to? In pilot season, you have your final run through, and that's kind of the celebration. And, the producers are like, oh, are you going to come to the playback? And I'm like, no, I got to go to this fire.
Yeah.
So I feel like a firefighter. I just follow sort of the fires and the issues that are happening.
Yeah.
But it's exciting, and, you still, those days when you see the music hit the visual, it still affects you.
How many projects at one time are you working on? Like, what are the shows that are on air that, you just finished working on? Because once the show hits air, is it pretty much not a stress factor for you anymore?
Oh no, because we're making shows. Some shows, Shondaland shows,
Okay.
they mix days before, sometimes a day before you see them.
Yeah, on the music side, I've gotten that call. Your song will be on tomorrow, but the editor is going to make the last call. And
Right,
you're like,
right.
and then it's
Right.
like, oh, no, it didn't get this one. Maybe the next one. Or,
Well, and there have been times when Shonda, God bless her, she'll go into her, at night, she'll go into her vinyl, and she'll find, it always is amazing.
Yeah.
But she'll be like, we've got to switch this out.
How fast can you do a turnaround like that?
Oh, we've done it in 12 hours.
Wow.
We don't like to,
Yeah.
but we have, and it's usually worth it.
Does it ever come to where, Shonda or a creator is directly having to negotiate with an artist to convince them, or is it usually like it never comes to that? Like how, like the legacy artists, you know, like the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, like how much do those guys pay attention to these things, or is it totally their teams?
It's very individualized. There are artists that absolutely look at every request, and they have, you know, certain rules. I mean, there have been artists that if you're eating meat in a scene, you can't use their song. I mean, it can get that really specific. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there are artists that just let their teams run it.
Yeah.
So it is always different.
Yeah.
I will say, you know, there's always the person who says, "Oh, my second cousin is a friend of the din, and I can," and we're always like, "Yeah, okay, you know, we're just going to go the regular route." However, there have been times when we may have gotten a denial, and I'll have the filmmaker write a letter, and sometimes it turns around. You know, sometimes you can appeal to the artist, and, you know, artist to artist, or have a conversation.
Yeah.
Again,
It's a lot of personalities,
Yeah,
you know.
I think the first time that came to my radar was School of Rock, Led Zeppelin. They did like a behind the scenes thing where they showed the whole cast begging Led Zeppelin for Immigrant Song. And then it seemed like after that, Led Zeppelin opened up to a lot more uses. No, because I've seen I'm a huge Led Zeppelin fan. So anytime I see it, I'm
Aren't we all?
oh, like they got one. Like, how did they get that? You know?
Well,
It's
a lot
hard.
of like Aerosmith is really tough. My best friend is a music supervisor, but licensing and publishing and all of that. And she's done that for 28 years. And I just couldn't do her job. I mean, just this stuff, the fires that I've watched her put out, and things that she has to beg for over the phone. And it's just, oh God, it's hard to watch. Yeah. Just people that way won't budge.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the iconic moments that you look back and you're like, I'm so glad we got that cleared? Like, this song in this scene, I will always remember.
Well, one of my first independent movies that I did was Edward Olmos's American Me. And there's a whole scene where you see how they bring the drugs into the prison. And Slipping into Darkness was a song that we wanted to use, and we had some trouble with it. And I was young, and I needed to, you know, make my stand. And I loved Edward Olmos at the time. He was just such an icon to me. And I was an Angelino, and it was very important. And I remember begging, and that's still a scene that I just think was a beautiful music supervision scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I love that scene. Recently, in fact, I just found out on the way coming over here, it got picked up. It's like one of our first pilots that got picked up. We had a song, and we really, really wanted it. But it's Elton John, and he has a moratorium right now on his songs because he's doing a movie.
Right.
So, you know, we're hoping that since we're going to be after his movie, we can get it back. We had to put a backup in, but that's like an ongoing thing that we're going to go back and please, Mr. Elton John, let us use this song.
Yeah. Can you, I guess T-Bone couldn't be any influence. No. Here we go. That's interesting to me. So the moratorium for him being he doesn't know what he needs, or why would he not release something while he's shooting a film?
A lot of artists do that, you know, particularly when they have biopics coming out about them, because, you know, I totally understand it. If you're an artist and you have a biopic coming out about you, you don't want a bunch of uses.
Interesting. Yeah, of course.
You know,
yeah, that makes sense.
I'm pretty sure that Queen had the same.
Yeah.
You know, and if you look back on any of them, I mean, I know that, you know, Disney, when they put out, you know, Beauty and the Beast and those kind of things, are very careful about where they license, because you don't want to cannibalize your audience.
Right.
You know,
that makes sense. Yeah. I know you have so many of these questions for her because you do this.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
Yeah,
but I know. I feel like I've gotten a lot of them from you. So it's really interesting because, you know, I'm on the filmmaking side and the music side. And so it's cool to get that perspective, especially for like anything Coen Brothers or anything where it's like, it's just, or I even think of like Quentin Tarantino. It's like everything they do is so like the music is so in your face, or maybe like a TV show, especially like certain kinds of TV shows, like they want it to feel like you don't necessarily notice, it just informs the character. So like those kinds of scenes are always really interesting to me, because that's going to define the song, and maybe an artist doesn't always want that, you know. And it's like, it is a powerful scene. Do they want their song to always be connected to that?
And, you know, just speaking on that, so here's an interesting one for you, Don. How do you know, everybody has a process, but how do you know when the song is right for a scene? And how does that work for you?
You know, it's funny because a lot of people come to me and want to be music supervisors. And the first question I ask them back is, what do you think music supervision is? And usually they're like, oh, well, I love music and I would love to pick songs for scenes. That is a fairy tale.
Right.
Because as a music supervisor, there's so many factors that go into picking a song, and it's usually not your subjective opinion. You have to, I always say, music supervisors present the menu, but the person in charge picks the meal. And the person in charge changes, and it can change. In pilot season, it starts with the director who does the first cut, and then it goes to the producers, and then it goes to the studio, and it goes to the network. You can have 4 changes, and that's all based on subjective opinion. And the thing is, no song is wrong, ever. It's just the subjective opinion and who has the authority, who's going to win.
Right.
So a good music supervisor should go in and assess that.
Right.
Assess who's going to win, what the priorities are, what the demographic is, what time it's coming on, all of those things when you're picking a song. Because, again, subjective. It's, you know, I mean, there are certain rules, of course, to putting a song in, and you know it when you see it. But you really do have to assess, you know, who's the boss,
right,
and what is this song for. And it changes.
And it's interesting to sit down and chat, because it's something that a lot of listeners and a lot of people in the business don't know. They don't know. They just watch the movie and they don't think about all the people behind the scenes working tirelessly, you know, to put this film together and what goes into it. So I think for a lot of people listening to this today, listening to a certain podcast, it falls again under, it's what you don't know, you don't know. And all those little jobs of people going, well, I didn't know that even existed. I didn't know that somebody had that job, and that job entailed all these different things, you know, because I know that you are constantly putting out fires. You know, and I said to you earlier, one of the things that I noticed when I met you was just this love, sort of just this affinity for music. There's a lot of business that goes into it too, but you really love the creative part of it, because there are music supervisors that I find them all to be somewhat creative and they have to love music, but there's a light that turns on with you, you know, and coming out of on the record, you know, just building things like that didn't exist before, and building a show that was about the songwriters, you know, and just giving them their props.
Yeah.
Well, the songwriters, and I have to tell you, I have such a crush on composers. You know, in my early career, I started collecting vinyl and CDs of composers. I have my garage is full of scores. I love that music because it is so, it can make or break a show.
Right.
And it tells a story without any words. And sometimes people don't even notice what it's doing because it comes from inside. It's a metabolic experience. I mean, it's been proven. So that what composers do, watching them, I just love them. And you know, something that I am proud of at ABC is that we are the only studio that regularly records with an orchestra. We do up to like 7 orchestras a week on our shows. Real musicians, you know, where you feel it.
Wow.
And people are always like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Well, actually, it's really not. The ROI on it is from the business side of it, because, you know, for somewhere like a little over half of what I pay for a song that plays 20, 30 seconds, I can have an orchestra record for like up to 25 minutes.
Yeah.
And you feel that.
And I think people would never think that that's how it breaks down. You know, I think they would think the opposite, you know, that, it must be cheaper to
more
put,
expensive,
to just drop a pre-made song in. But that's a really cool insight into how live music could still sustain, you know, in the future.
I actually never thought of that before, ever. But I guess you're right, because you pay out the nose for these songs, right? And you can hire these musicians to come in and just play something live.
Right.
And
And
create
there's
something.
special for that show that's unique.
Original, you own it.
Yeah.
You know, as a company, you don't have to go back every time if you want to put it in a promo and you know, when you listen to things like, you know, Desperate Housewife, you listen to that open title or any cue and you know that is Desperate Housewives.
Right.
So it's a huge branding tool, which is another reason why, you know, you want to make sure that your score is beautiful and unique and has its own signature.
Yeah,
I love
that's
that.
amazing. So as kind of wrapping up, as you are kind of moving into the future, you'd mentioned producing a little bit more on the horizons. As like, how as you see that connecting that to music with whatever projects you know plan on doing in the future? What's kind of the next step for you as far as what you're looking forward to and what you're currently working on?
I have several projects that are music based in the works. You know, we'll see if they happen. Producing is definitely something I want to do, and it will always be somewhat musical. How can it not be? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that
Totally.
that is the next step. But I love the yin and yang of it.
Yeah.
So
That's exciting.
We'll see.
Do you, I do have a question though, on the heels of that. We ask a lot of our artists on LipRoll about, is there any musician or anything that you've worked on or anybody that you see that you think deserves more credit? Is there any other roles in the entertainment industry that you think deserve more credit, that don't get a lot of credit?
Besides music supervisors?
Yeah.
Who don't get, yeah, that is a really, assistants.
Yeah.
All those assistants that are so talented and support all of us, they, you know, and coordinators, those people do not get the credit and the appreciation.
They work so many hours. I mean, you see on a project, they're up supporting.
And they are our future.
Yeah.
You know, and I wish we paid more attention to them and the things that they say and their perspectives, particularly when you're like in an editing room or, you know, putting together the last final bits of the show. Mm-hmm. They have a good eye, interesting eye.
Different from us. We talked about that earlier, just the different generations and what their jobs are and, you know, just, giving them direction and how they take that direction. But it's all takes a village, right? It's just a team. And I love meeting people through this business that are out of my wheelhouse and things that I don't know about. You know, I said to you guys earlier, we were talking and I said, one of the things that I did as a young person was surround myself by contemporaries and people who are much smarter than me, and had been doing what they were doing a lot longer. You know, and I think you have those mentors, because I've turned into a mentor and you're a massive mentor to people and you really enjoy that role. And I think, again, not to harp on it, but it was one of the things that knowing you, the time that I have, is the way that you throw yourself into everything, whether it's business, it's negotiating, it's creative. And I think it's special, you know, and I think people don't know that these jobs really exist. And there are people behind the scenes like you that are making all of this happen. And it's so tied into our culture as musicians and the composers and the writers, you know, it's all really important, and we're all sort of in that industry together. So.
Yeah. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us and sharing.
We love having you here on LipRoll.
Thank you for the good questions.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks,
awesome.
Dawn.
Thanks.